Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Ann Francke, the Chief Executive of the CMI, and welcome to Better Managers Briefing on this Friday. I'm really delighted today to have a very special guest, companion Paul Devoy, who is the Chief Executive of Investors and People. Welcome, Paul. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you, Ann.
And I have to admit, there's a special reason for today's timing to have you on the show, and maybe we can start there.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to announce that CMI have achieved Investors and People Platinum status. It's the highest level of accreditation that we offer. And maybe if I just put into context how big an achievement it is, when we developed the framework a few years ago, we spent a huge amount of time researching what were the ingredients of a high-performance workplace that's driven through engagement with people and excellent leadership and management. We reviewed over 300 academic papers. We did a year-long consultation exercise across 1,500 organisations to come up with a framework. And the framework was quite a upgrade from the previous one in terms of what it required of organisations. So to be at the highest end of the highest possible quality standard is an absolutely enormous achievement. And to put that in context, only 3% of our organisations have achieved platinum. Investors and People, normal standards, something that you have to work hard to achieve, but to achieve platinum shows an organisation that's committed to high values in terms of leadership and people management over a long period of time, and it's consistent and long performance that we measure. So huge congratulations to you, Anne, and the team at CMI on this really fantastic achievement.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. And on behalf of everybody at CMI, I know that we're thrilled, and it is really everybody's achievement. It reflects the great work that we're all doing. And thank you also to the CMI community for making us, encouraging us and motivating us to do great work. And I can mention that we did this assessment completely digitally, and it worked really well. So I would encourage organizations that can to carry on. It's really important during these COVID times that we do remember to carry on investing in great management and leadership and looking after our teams. So if I could, maybe Paul, you could comment generally on what are some of the management and leadership trends that you're seeing in your across the economy and IIP organizations, and how is that changing for the good or for the less good?
Yeah. I think the main thing that's came out of the research that we've been looking at is there was a trend towards flexible working over the last sort of 5-10 years, but it was quite a slow progress. Maybe in some sectors it was slightly faster than others, but what I think we're finding is that flexible working has moved on 10 years and 10 weeks in the lockdown period, and those changes that have been forced upon organisations are now getting to the point where what we're finding is that they're becoming, I don't know what the right phrase is it semi-permanent or quasi-permanent, but they're just at that kind of Rubicon where people are starting to say, well, I actually quite like working this way, but I've been perched on the couch for the last 3 months. I do need a proper desk. I do need a proper seat. It requires a completely different way for managers to actually engage with their people. And, you know, the whole 9-to-5 culture and needing to see someone in front of you to be satisfied that they're working, those kind of paradigms don't fit anymore. So unless we invest in our managers to help them adapt to this new way of working, then, you know, we won't get the benefits from it. And there is undoubtedly challenges, but there's huge benefits to be derived if we do it well.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. We've seen that productivity has increased from working at home, as has job satisfaction. But you mentioned, you know, that managers do need to manage differently, and if you're managing remotely. And what are some of the tips you have for people that are leading their teams remotely?
Yeah. So for me, there are some excellent software packages out there that you can use Zoom for 45 minutes for free. You know, there's no excuse for managers not to have regular interactions with their team members on Zoom calls. It's dead easy to work. Cost doesn't need to be a barrier. And what we found in our organisation, surprisingly, is the level of engagement, not just between managers and their teams, but across teams, has actually improved significantly over this period, because they've utilised the technology in a much more deep way than they've done before. So we use Slack, and the level of people that were using Slack was good, but it wasn't full engagement. Now people are having meetings in Slack, they're doing planning meetings on Slack, they're sharing documents on Slack, they're collaborating on Slack in a way that they never did before, and actually in a more effective way than trying to get everybody into a meeting room every so often. It's more organic and it's more in real time. So, and I've seen that from other organizations that we've been talking to, that, people adapt really well if you facilitate it properly. We're a very adaptable breed, the human race. So,
yeah.
What is that phrase? Is that necessity is the mother of invention or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Quite that right, but yeah.
Well, one of my guests made the point, and it's the point you're making, that actually it was, people say Charles Darwin said the strongest species survive, and that's not true. The species that survive are the most adaptable species, and that's really what you're saying. Yeah. But what about for organizations that can't work remotely, so that have to be managing on site? What are some of the pressures and methods there for people to cope with this crisis?
Yeah, well, surprisingly, for the research that we did, 91% of all organisations, whether they're office-based or not, had at least some part of their workforce working from home, which that number really surprised me, how high that was. But obviously, I used to work in the prison service. You can't be a prison officer work from home. So I think it's about making sure, obviously, that the basic health and safety requirements are there, and how quickly organisations can adapt to that. And again, leadership and management comes into that. Have you got the right management approaches in there to make sure you've properly planned and thought through how you need to adapt your organisation to physical distancing and all the COVID rules that change, as we all know, on a almost hourly basis.
Yes, that's very, very tricky. And of course, we've also talked about blended working. So your figure of 91% having some people working from home. What about the challenge of managing teams, some of whom are on site and some of whom are remote? Any tips there?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I'm a great believer in having regular dialogue between the manager and the employee. I think historically, too often people have relied on quite cumbersome appraisal processes, and they only have a proper conversation with their employees every so often. And I really like Clear Review. I don't know if you've heard of that application. It's a new HR tech company that was set up by the former HR director of Sony, and we use it every 6 weeks as a minimum. You have a check-in with your member of staff. You make sure that you've covered the objectives. You make sure that they've had feedback, and people can give feedback from all parts of the organisation, again, digitally. So it doesn't matter you're not in the same office. The software enables you to do that. So being creative and thinking about what tools can enable you to continue to have the rich conversations that you need to have to performance manage your team properly, utilise technology, and that way, whether they're in the office or in the factory or whatever, or whether they're remote, if you have the right tools in place, it can help facilitate making sure that you continue to manage your team well.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So regular communication and check-ins, and making sure that you're asking your employees and those you manage how they're doing during this, and making sure that you're communicating clearly. But you mentioned software. I have to ask you this. So there is also software that basically spies on employees working from home and counts their keystrokes. What do you make of that?
I think that's horrendous. I really think that is horrendous. So I'd love this to have been my quote, but it was someone else that said it to me, and I thought it was so true. If you trust your employees so little, why the hell did you employ them in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great quote. And you're so right. Trust is at the heart of great management and leadership. And definitely trust must be at the heart in this crisis to help people to cope. So, of course, this crisis is here for the longer haul. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Where do you think companies need to be moving now? How can organizations combat COVID fatigue and keep people motivated and keep them going?
Yeah. So I'm a great believer that, what are the intrinsic things that motivate people, and that doesn't really change necessarily given the context. So that focus on purpose, or why are we here? Why are we here together? And then how do we adapt to whatever the world throws at us now? And how can we be, I know this is such an overused word and I hesitate to use it, but how can you be agile in order to actually respond properly? I wish there was a better way to describe it, because that word's kind of used out of context and used for the wrong things. But,
Well, wait, when you say agile, tell us what's your definition of it.
So my definition of it is that we live in a world that's totally unpredictable. Yeah, nobody, well, apart from maybe Bill Gates, very few people saw this thing coming. And you can't really predict the future. The world's becoming more and more uncertain. So organizations that succeed are organizations that are able to thrive in a very uncertain world. My favorite book that I've ever read is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. It was a guy that wrote The Black Swan. And he talks about creating an anti-fragile, and he doesn't talk about it from the perspective of organizations. He talks about it from the perspective of individuals in society. So how do you develop yourself or develop society in a way that it succeeds when there are shocks, and it succeeds when things are uncertain? Because having the inherent ability to respond to that means that you're going to be adaptable and survive no matter what comes down the track. So how do you create an anti-fragile organization? You've got to invest in your people. You've absolutely got to invest in your managers, and you've got to make sure that you can pivot your core competence to whatever the world throws at you. So one example of that is one of our clients as a lifestyle business, and they help people define what colours actually work best with their skin complexion and all that. And it's the franchise that has been really successful. But it needed to be done face to face. So what they did was they pivoted to actually doing online style consultations so they sat down and thought about, right, what is our essence of what we do as a business, and how can we make that relevant in the new circumstance? So for me, organizations that are going to really thrive are ones that are able to really do that and galvanize the team to respond to whatever the changes that's coming.
That's great advice, and it's a great example too, and a great idea actually. I think we can all use that.
My haircut's not the best. I don't get
Oh, we spend so much time on these calls. We really probably should get a style makeover. Yeah. It's a great idea. And actually, I've also heard of many food hospitality businesses pivoting to doing deliveries, for example, would be another example. And obviously, digital skills are absolutely critical in all of these cases. But your point about uncertainty in the uncertain world and becoming anti-fragile, I really love that. And there is another author that has said, and his name is going to escape me, so I apologize to him, that we really cannot plan more than 2 weeks out in this crisis, right? So those organizations that, are stuck with, no, I've got to have a 5-year forecast. Yeah. I mean, what do you make of that? Is that's probably not going to work anymore, is it?
No, I mean, it's one of the things that comes out. Nassim Taleb talks about, he calls people flaneurs. I think it's a French word that talks about people who just talk about things. Over the years, I have become more and more and more skeptical about forecasts. Yeah. Unless you're prepared to bet your mortgage on it, I'm not sure that I'm actually going to listen. People who just make these, and like it never ever comes to pass. the Office of Budget Responsibility, how many times have their forecasts been right? Like never, I think, never, I don't think. So why do we pay so much attention to it? I think the reason for it is that as human beings, we don't like uncertainty. So if someone gives us a forecast, it has a degree of certainty in it so that we can hook onto, that kind of makes us feel safer, I think maybe the right word. But certainly the businesses that I've been talking to, like Stuart that runs Clear Review, he's only doing quarterly plans. Yeah. Where are we in the next quarter? What do we need to do in the next quarter? And that shorter horizon, and I know that in our own business, has actually helped engage and focus people on, right, how do we get to that? You know, I know we've always argued against short-termism, but in a crisis like this, when the future is so uncertain, I think it's a bit of a waste of time to try and work a five-year plan, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So quarterly forecasts rather than 5-year forecasts for organizations, and being agile as defined as being anti-fragile are some really great tips. Now, what about individual managers and leaders and their teams? You know, how can we translate some of that for them to stay engaged and motivated in this crisis?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's about creating the conditions where you give people huge amount of support and encouragement during it. As I said earlier, people don't like uncertainty. As human beings, we're hardwired to crave safety and certainty, and it's in pretty much short supply at the moment. What you can't do is make promises, and it's the same in my business. You can't make promises about what the future is going to hold. But what you can do is, if you can build that point that you talked about, Anne, about that level of trust. And I really like Robert Cialdini's work, you know, in the kind of 5 levels of leadership, that get that trust element first. If you can build trust, then when things go wrong over and above that, you can deal with that. You can have open and difficult conversations, as long as they know that you have no bad intent for them, that everything that you're doing is from a position where there's a mutual trust and respect, but that you want to support that individual to be the best version of themselves. So for me, managers need to build trust amongst their team, and then engage them in all the difficult decisions and all the challenges that you face, really involve them in the decision-making process. And then that way they feel like they've got some sort of control and some sort of influence in a very uncertain environment.
That's an excellent point, because in order to create trust, you do have to engage, you have to involve people. I think it's a very important point, and be open and not be afraid of sharing bad news, right? Because especially now, we are experiencing, so many of us, bad news. And so we do have to be open about that, but at the same time, try to encourage people to look for some of the silver linings. And you know, you've talked about some of those silver linings. And is there something that you would advise individuals and managers to do that might help them to spot some silver linings as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to continually look for what are the opportunities in the situations that we're in. I mean, everything, even in a crisis, there can be opportunities, and quite often you find in crises some really good entrepreneurs make a huge amount of money. I mean, I guess the guy that started Zoom and the guy that owns Slack, and yeah, I wouldn't have minded having a few of their shares.
You're right. It's proven there is more innovation in a crisis. By the way, we're going to be taking questions for Paul. So if you have a question, please do type it into the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. And also, if you'd like to join our community, there's also a link in the chat box that you can click on, and you can join the CMI community. So our first question is from Steve. And Steve asks, there's a very interesting Netflix show about AI and social media and the influences it has on society and influencing topics such as politics. Do you see a potential relating to AI and management and leadership for any positive impacts?
Yeah, if it's used in the right way, absolutely yes. But as you mentioned, if it goes into the realms of, you know, measuring key depressions that people use, and I know someone who works for a big IT business and some of his colleagues sit and hit the tap bar while they're having a cup of coffee because they're measuring their key depressions. That to me is just not going to. But as we've talked about earlier, where you can use technology like Zoom or the other tools that actually enable engagement with people, enable collaboration, enable things that are positive, then there's huge opportunities for that. But like any tool, you can use it in a good way, you can use it in a bad way. And I'm an advocate, and I'm sure you are, Anne, is that to focus on the human element of it, and
yes.
and not for it to become too Taylorist and machine based.
Yes.
You won't get the best people in that environment.
No, AI is no substitute for human emotional intelligence and judgment. And in fact, it makes it more important than ever. I think I certainly would argue, and it sounds like you agree. So our next question is from Harriet. Can you speak specifically to the challenges of being inclusive and gender sensitive, given the data that has come out on the impact of women of the work from home change?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have to hold my hands up, and I haven't seen that research on the impact, but I'm guessing the premise of the question that there's been a negative impact on women.
So what it shows, there's a couple of studies, that one we've done where people believe that the return to the office was going to penalize women more than men, because women are more likely than men to be doing the child care. And if there are issues with schools opening or children not being able to go to school, the other research that's just come out is from the Lean In organization, showing that women have been leaving the workforce because of the stresses of combining work with childcare and homeschooling. So those, I think, are the things that are being referred to.
Yeah, so I've always been a huge advocate of flexible working. So when we became a community interest company in 2017, one of the first things I said to the team is, I don't care when you do the work. If you do your best work at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, but you want to finish work at 3 o'clock to go and pick your child up from school, that's up to you. I measure you on the basis of how you are as a person with your colleagues and what you deliver for the organisation. The way that you construct the hours, as long as it doesn't negatively impact on someone else, but if you can work flexibly, then that should be encouraged. But it comes back to the point we made right at the beginning, and managers need to be able to facilitate and structure work and organise work and create the conditions where people feel it's safe and they don't feel that they have to do a robotic 9 to 5 or a back shift or whatever. If the work can be organised in a different way, this crisis should be the beginning of a revolution that actually means that the balance between our home lives and the responsibilities that we have and how we organise our work, okay, they maybe get more blurred, but actually if we do it well, it should create a better balance between the two.
Yes, that's right. And actually employers that encourage that and say, you know what, you need to take a break because you have a child that you need to homeschool, take that break. Just put it in your calendar, homeschooling. And then your colleagues know, right? And I think it's about having that humanity and emotional intelligence to let people work in the way that works for them. And that's how you'll get the best. And there's a similar question here from Pavel. Is remote working supporting or undermining workplace diversity?
It should promote it, because there's no reason why you can't recruit someone from, again, we're making the assumption, the risk with these conversations, we think about everything as an office-based thing, and that's not the case for everyone. But there are very many roles that don't require someone to be in a specific location, and we should be able to recruit in a more diverse way and recruit people from different backgrounds, because it doesn't matter where they're located. The opportunities to have more diversity in the workplace is definitely there. But I think we need to think about how we recruit people and where we go to get the talent, and be more open to look at different routes and different ways of finding that talent and nurturing it, rather than the routes that we used previously. So I don't have an answer about how we do that specifically, but I think there's an opportunity there.
I think it's a great point, and you can recruit a much more diverse workforce. And remember, diversity does deliver better business results.
Yeah.
And you're going to get another question about diversity from James. His question is, equality, diversity, and inclusion have become the new buzzword for equal opportunities. How successful was the equal opportunities concept? So do you agree with James that equality, diversity, and inclusion are just a buzzword for equal opportunity, or do they mean something different to you?
So I'm not a big fan of labels. So for me, it's about what are the things that's going to make people's lives better, and what you call it. I don't particularly have a strong view on. The most important thing for me is that these discussions, and because there's been a big debate recently about Black Lives Matter and people questioning the organisation that's behind that, and the debate about whether it's the message that's important or whether the organisation that's behind it has that has to pay some attention to. For me, the most important thing is what's the discussions and the debates that we're having as a result of some of these labels, and is it moving us forward as a society to create a fairer and more equal world to live in. So for me, it's the outcome that's more important rather than a kind of technical discussion about the labels.
Yeah.
Is it facilitating a discussion that's actually moving us on, that's changing the way we manage organisations, changing the way that we recruit talent, the way that we develop talent, the way that we promote, or that's the most important thing. What we call it, I'm less concerned about.
I think that's a great answer. And also, what's also very important in the inclusion discussion is understanding the experience of Black people in your workforce, for example. How do they feel? What have they experienced? And that's so much more important for creating an inclusive culture, is having that discussion and really understanding it, rather than, as you say, what you call it. I do agree with you there. Our next question is from Tom. I've conducted research within the organization I'm in, and the research found loss of innovation and collaboration despite the use of Microsoft Teams. Further, issues with new starters, loss of tacit knowledge. What are your suggestions to solve?
Yeah. So I don't think the issue there is to do with Teams per se or the software application. It's about how you deploy it, and about the way that the managers organise the deployment of those tools and how they facilitate and enable people to get together to have that collaboration. I can only speak for myself, but in our organisation, it's improved dramatically since the lockdown, because people have come together and used the tools in a much more you've used the facilities within those tools much more than they were doing before. And we've tried to facilitate and enable them to do that in a much more intense way than we did before. So I don't know your organisation, obviously, but my hunch would be that it's to do with the way that the leaders and managers have actually enabled and facilitated collaboration and team working, rather than the fact that those tools don't really enable you to do that.
Yeah, it's about behavior and culture. I want to underscore that. I mean, we're very honored to get our Platinum Award in the middle of the pandemic. We were gold last time, and it's because the behaviors and the culture have enabled better use of the technology and more collaboration, as you say. Now, the last question here is from Hassam, and it's a great one. How can managers deal with the mental health issues in relation to the pandemic we're going through now and lockdown in certain places to get the work done?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I mean, again, the research that we did, concerns about mental health of people was a huge concern. We were one of our practitioners was doing an assessment of a client and spoke to an employee who hadn't seen someone in weeks, and became really genuinely quite worried about that person. And then, without breaking confidentiality, made sure that something was done about that. So it's something we need to pay huge attention to. Going back to praising CMI, one of the things I always quote in any presentation or talk that I do is about the accidental manager and the 2 million accidental managers in the UK. And I test that out with people when I speak to them. So I remember speaking to a GP. I don't think I've ever had the chance to tell you this, Anne. I was speaking to a GP a couple of years ago, and he told me that 80% of the people who came into his surgery presenting a mental health issue was work-related. Mm-hmm. And the majority of, when he then unpicked what the work-related issue was, the majority of that related to the relationship with their line manager and poor management. There is a huge correlation between people not being effective managers and the mental health of their employees. Huge correlation. So unless we can help people be better managers, we are not going to address the mental health problem in the workplace. It has a huge impact. And just because someone's a great engineer or a great salesperson doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good manager. You can train people. I think, some people are more predisposed to being good at it than others, but everyone can be trained to be competent at it. So for me, that would be step number one.
Well, that is a brilliant step number one. It is our mission at CMI to turn accidental managers into conscious and inclusive leaders. And obviously, IIP is a great organization also to help you do that and help make sure that your managers are as good as they can be. So, Paul, it's been fabulous to have you. Thank you for taking the time. And thank you again for your vote of confidence in CMI. We're delighted to be platinum. Yeah, take care, everybody.
Congratulations. Thanks, everybody.